There were splendid glimmers of red in the sky. Maybe somebody was waving around a flare light from space. Faint, however observable. We, as a whole, made UFO jokes and chuckled as we nailed our tents into the ground. I realized without a doubt that there were 5 of us. We have all been companions since early center school, and were commending our secondary school graduation with this escape setting up camp excursion. The blazes of red must have halted arbitrarily as we made discussion while repairing our tents. Dave figured out how to assemble his tent the quickest and let us know he planned to discover a few branches for the fire. I recall how he had functioned with me at the nearby corner store the year before. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at a forlorn corner store significantly more fun than it should be. There was likewise Eric in the corner, actually pursuing his tent manual, squirming with his unmistakable round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others. However, I actually recollect sitting with him in numerical class and replicating his schoolwork one time. Ava was additionally there chatting with Sally, my cousin. Both had chosen to collaborate and deal with each tent in turn. I likewise have clear recollections of them, sticking around at school in our standard spots. As a matter of fact, I even knew Ava's more youthful sibling, as he used to ask to go with us any place we went. I bring this up in light of the fact that I'm certain that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everybody in the gathering. So Dave went to get a few branches as we took out a few foldable seats and set them up around the fire pit. I felt uncomfortable as the sun set and murkiness started to consume the backwoods. The shadows of trees stretched around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a spotlight from his pack, while we considered what was taking Dave such a long time. He showed up before long, the brutal stirring hints of the shrubberies implying his return. We were totally covered in our seats as of now, covered by our coats. The temperature had decreased rapidly, and a slight breeze was starting to get. "Geez, you folks weren't even trying to take out a seat for me," Dave said, as he organized every one of the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 seats around the fire. I attempted to excuse what was happening, yet regardless of how hard I centered, my head felt like it was submerged. I had ideal lucidity up until that second yet, when I attempted to zero in on why 5 seats were involved when Dave hadn't plunked down, yet my head appeared to quit filling in as though something was coming in and taking out my viewpoints. Instinctually, I felt significantly more uncomfortable now, and I had set why. The entire woods had gone dead quiet. I glanced around at the essences of the others and could see that they had felt something very similar. Eric was squirming with his fingers, attempting to filter around the gathering and spot the additional individual. Yet, it was purposeless. I filtered each face, each carved in stress and scowling in disappointment, aside from, "It's okay, I'll get the seat myself," Dave said, ending the quiet and fairly reducing the strain. I got up and proposed to help him. He investigated my eyes and gestured intentionally. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents. However, I kept my eyes stuck on our gathering. "The number of individuals that are here," I murmured to Dave as he glanced around and understood that we had without a doubt just pressed 5 seats. Each individual had carried with them their own seat. As a matter of fact, they were weighty to convey, and we wouldn't bring any extra unnecessarily. "There's 5, right? I mean, there's 5 seats," Dave answered. His voice faltered as he talked. "No, I simply think perhaps one of us failed to remember our seat," I said. My brain was battling to resolve the issue head-on and presently looked to track down reasonable reasons, all things considered. I didn't exactly feel in charge of my viewpoints. It seemed like swimming in a fantasy. And on the off chance that I attempted to compel myself to ponder who the sixth individual was, my head would start to pulsate. Definitely, that sounds about right, really, Dave said, unwinding and going to the gathering at the point when we strolled back to the fire pit and circle of seats. 2 seats were vacant, one for myself and one for Dave. Everything was included now, despite the fact that we as a whole concurred. It wasn't previously. Sally recommended we were all presumably worn out after the long climb to arrive and likely simply required some rest. She might have been correct. We were all sleepless from getting up early today to make it on time. Ava drew out the beverages. The entire 6-pack was discharged. We, as a whole, drew nearer to the popping fire for warmth as we took tastes from our jars and thought back on recollections of the year before. Ava was busy enlightening us concerning that one time she was home alone with abnormal things occurring in her home. When I got these unexpected chills, regardless of the wonderful warmth of the fire, what felt comfortable and safe minutes prior felt wrong now, all since I understood that there was an urgent detail I missed. Who lit the fire? I asked, totally interfering with Ava in her story and breaking every other person's drenching. Everybody looked immediately irritated until they understood they had no response. Yet again, I examined the appearances gazing back at me, all scarcely enlightened by the light from the fire, all recognizable and pale from dread. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric inquired. Dave shook his head. "I think the individual remaining behind Jenny got it done," Sally expressed, investigating at me. I whipped my head around so rapidly it hurt. My heart was beating in my ears. There was nothing behind me, aside from the incorporating haziness of the forest. Gazing at those tall, dim trees behind me caused me to feel uncovered. I felt like a lost bird in a huge field. "Stand by. I don't have the foggiest idea," Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide, and she was shaking noticeably. She kept on glancing around madly as Ava moved over to her, putting her hands on her shoulders and attempting to quiet her down. "I figure we ought to leave this spot," Ava stammered. "No doubt something simply doesn't feel right. Yet I can't be totally sure," Dave said. "Yet. It's so dull out in the backwoods currently. We'd most likely get lost in the event that we leave now." Another person said, "No doubt I figure we ought to remain the evening and leave when we can tomorrow." Eric concurred. I attempted to dissent, however acknowledged Eric was correct. The forest held onto a severe haziness, inside which route would be close to unthinkable. We should not rest in our different tents as a sanity check, Sally said. We as a whole concurred. We just carried one individual tent with us, yet we could crush 2 on the off chance that we attempted. That way, nobody would be distant from everyone else around evening time. Following this discussion, we as a whole got up and made our matches. I went with Dave, and Sally, like generally, went with Ava. Eric continued to whine that he didn't have a couple. However, we consoled him. He did. He wouldn't acknowledge it. I feel like eventually we as a whole understood that there were just 5 of us, and out of nowhere, we were all crouching up in the center of the clearing. For what reason do we continue to think there are 6 of us here? Eric inquired. Sweat was trickling down his face, regardless of the virus. We had almost abandoned him on his own, under the supposition that there was someone else. My stomach turned as I pressed my eyes shut and attempted to recap everybody here intellectually. My head pulsated, yet I continued to push it. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and I was pointing at every one of them as I said the name. I spewed and exhausted the items in my stomach on the ground when I moved beyond Sally. The left half of my head felt like there was a blade trapped in it. My vision was hazy. Dave held me up to prevent me from falling, and we, as a whole, silently began to move towards the tents as somebody put the chute out. Dave helped me into a tent while the four outsiders examined what to do. I could zero in on bits of the discussion as the horrifying agony beating against my skull went back and forth in waves. Sally had the splendid thought of orchestrating 3 tents together, so their openings confronted together at right points in a kind of U shape, so we could rest as close as could be expected, and furthermore, limit the entry to our tents. Dave was going to go to help as they worked outside, yet I grasped his hand and requested that he stay with me. The tents found an opportunity to orchestrate. I began to feel improved once everybody got subsided into their tents. A fast head count affirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would need to rest in his tent alone. However, he was more alright with it, since every one of the tents were extremely close at this point. Thinking back now, I think he was simply attempting to put a valiant face on for us. I lament that second profoundly, allowing him to rest in his tent alone. He was in every case less coordinated in our gathering, and realized that not a solitary one of us would coordinate with him. Not long prior to heading to sleep, we, as a whole, consented to leave when the sun rose in the first part of the day. I took one final look outside the tent into the backwoods prior to attempting to nod off. The breeze had gotten, and the tree limbs were influencing tenderly. Past our clearing was simply unadulterated murkiness. It seemed like the trees were surrounding me, with the weak twilight enlightening our clearing. I turned my head to investigate at the 2 tents we had forgotten about, and saw somebody remaining close to them. Regardless of the conditions, rest came rapidly and without any problem. Ava's abrasive shout awakened me around midnight. Dave and I tore our tent entryway open to find Sally and Ava investigating Eric's tent. We shoved them to the side. Eric's hiking bed was moved up. He was still inside it, his head in the middle, face bended in unadulterated distress. The remainder of his body moved around it, with the blue texture presently trickling with dull blood. Dave sped up the entryway of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become lustrous and unfocused. Sally was shaking her over and again, destroying streaming her face. Dave got his light and shouted at us to get up and run. We abandoned the campground and entered the path we had come from. The 5 of us crouched together, Dave driving in the front as he cast his powerless electric lamp over the way so we could see it. All we needed to assist us with overcoming this 2-hour trail was a little white circle of light. Indeed, even the moon neglected to enlighten our environmental elements through the thick foliage. Ava stumbled and fell, turning her lower leg. We halted. Somebody said they knew how to support it, so we could continue onward. They hauled her into the forest. All things considered, it happened excessively fast for any of us to process. Sally was going to pursue Ava when Dave held her back. She battled and figured out how to free herself, running into the trees to follow the reverberations of Ava's shouts. I was going to pursue her, yet Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We really want to leave, Jenny. Please," he said. I wavered, however, shocked into movement once more, when Sally's voice was cut off suddenly. She had been calling out to Ava as she pursued her. Dave and I kept on running down the path, attempting to get to our vehicle so we could leave. There was nothing we could do. Sooner or later, there were 3 of us running on the path, Dave and I side by side, while somebody followed us intently behind. Dave, who's behind us, I heaved. My heart was taking steps to burst through my ribcage, and my legs were consumed. He went to check me out. Disarray changed into dread all over, and afterward into rage. "You continue to run," he told me as he delivered a folding knife from his jeans. He gave me the vehicle keys, which I almost dropped. Then, at that point, he pivoted unexpectedly and hopped at whoever was behind us. I kept on running in dread as the hints of a battle developed behind me. I stumbled and tumbled through the path for what felt like hours. I didn't permit myself to stop. I nearly cried when the path finished, and I entered the recognizable vehicle. Not squandering a second, I hurried to the vehicle and fired it up, advancing quickly out of that backwards and onto the parkway inside only seconds. I'm composing this post at a rest stop. My telephone has at last recaptured administration, and I've called 911 to attempt to make sense of the circumstance. I don't think they trust my form of occasions. However, they sent a vehicle my way in any case. As I pause, the sun is at last beginning to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I will check the reason why the individual in my rearward sitting arrangement has been so quiet the entire time.